Fire Dragons. Dragons of Fire. In my last Eldar video, I talked about how I became the beneficiary of some gorgeous Rogue Trader era models, sent to me by Tim, from the estate of his late friend. You see, Tim has given me the honour of restoring these models and giving them a loving home. In this video, I continue that journey with these Fire Dragons. Looks like it's time for a miniature escape with Miniscape. Just so you know what to expect if you've not watched any of my videos before, I take a unit, I build it, I paint it, and halfway through, I discuss its history and or rules, usually from 2nd edition 40k, and maybe 3rd edition too if the stars align, and that's the plan in this video as well. The Fire Dragons you see here were painted by Tim's late friend. It felt wrong to strip them, though if that were the case, this would be a much shorter video. And anyway, Tim wanted me to give them the old spit polish and to paint them up nice. Coincidentally, another friend, David, asked me to paint his newer Fire Dragon models. I say newer, but they are not new at all, but rather metal miniatures released in 2000, as part of the Codex Craftworld Eldar release for 3rd edition Warhammer 40k. I'll be painting both sets of miniatures, each with a different scheme. Let's begin with the Rogue Trader era Fire Dragons. Each of these models was a single piece, which, as you can imagine, makes assembly significantly easier. I mounted each of the models on 25mm bases, and applied some coarse Lancashire sand for a bit of texture. And then I primed them white using Citadel White Scar spray paint. In the first step, I'm applying Citadel Contrast Flesh Tearers Red. As you can see, I'm just slopping this all over, but the reason I'm doing this is to lay down some shadows in the recesses before the main base colour is applied. If you're speed painting Eldar, I can see this being a good choice of paint. Maybe this is the only base coat you want, and that's fine. Using this, I'm sure you could get a battle-ready force down in no time. I've left the helmet and the fusion gun white for now, since they will be yellow and black respectively. The next paint I'm using for the base coat is Vallejo Orange Red. I paint this all over the armour except for the recesses, making sure that all of the plates and nodules, and even the more cloth-looking parts, get a good solid coat of this, which takes a couple of thin coats. However, I also ensure that I don't go over the Flesh Tearers Red between the armour plates, so that the shading is maintained. And this is how he looks after the first coat. Not quite vibrant enough yet, so I give it another pass. Fun fact, I picked up this paint years ago as a substitute for the old Citadel Blood Angels Red. I was using that colour to paint my Primaris Blood Angels in a sort of retro style. This Vallejo paint was a little bit more orange than the original Blood Angels Red, but when mixed with another red, it was close enough that it allowed it to be a replacement. I've been reticent to show off my Primaris collection, since it's not really 2nd or 3rd edition, but you never know, someone may twist my arm to make a video about that one day. Now, at this stage, I felt there was yet more ground to be taken in the realm of vibrancy, so I took some of this Trollslayer orange paint and glazed it over the previous coat, focusing on the areas that would catch the most light. In other words, I left the Vallejo Orange Red in the more shadowy regions, while this orange was on the more upper-facing parts. In hindsight, I probably could have omitted either this step or the Vallejo Orange Red step, but this was all part of my constant experimentation. Experimentation that you get to enjoy vicariously. You're welcome. Time to do a spot of highlighting. I mixed some dark sand with Trollslayer Orange to get this flesh colour, which I used to highlight all of the edges of the armour panels. I admit I was a little rough after the first pass, so I went back later and tidied this up off camera. And here he is after the highlighting step. And you know what time it is, people. Oh yes, it's always dark sand o'clock somewhere in the world. Dark sand goes on the helmet, and the power cell for the fusion gun, as well as the one slung around his belt. The reason for this choice of paint will become apparent shortly. In the meantime, I'm using Citadel Contrast Black Legion to paint the fusion gun. I could water down black paint, but I find this just rolls out of the pot, nice and smooth. It's so convenient. Now that the dark sand is dry, I take magenta by AK Paints, thin it down a little, and paint it into the recesses on the helmet. It's possible you know the trick I'm doing here. You see, pink under a contrast yellow paint looks orange, and therefore is an excellent shade. So I'm just putting in the groundwork for that magic to happen. When all of that is dry, I take Imperial Fist's contrast paint and apply it all over the dark sand magenta parts. A simple, vibrant yellow. Beautiful. Fenrisian grey is used on the pistol holster to highlight the ridges on the pipes and to edge highlight the fusion gun itself. As I often say, I think black looks better when it's been highlighted with a more bluey shade of grey, but I've heard highlighting with a dark green can also give good results. I take Evil Sun Scarlet and apply this to the pipes on the helmet and these little nodules just next to his eyes. And then I remembered that I actually wanted the muzzle of his weapon to be red rather than yellow, so I fixed that here as well. Vallejo Flat Blue is used to paint the ribbon just above his knee here, and also his belt, which you can only see from the back. Citadel Caliban Green is painted as a base coat for all the gems, while Orc Flesh is used on the eye lenses. To be fair, I could have used the same colour for these last two bits. I'm just being extra fancy for no reason. Warpstone Glow is used as the first highlight on the gems, followed by Citadel Moot Green, and finally a dot of white in one quadrant to fool you into thinking it's shiny. Trollslayer Orange is used to highlight the indents on the muzzle, and Army Painter Barbarian Flesh is used to further highlight these, along with the ribbed pipes on the helmet. Finally, I use Grass Green all over the base, finishing with a dark sand dry brush on the texture. And that's the Rogue Trader paint scheme done for the fire dragons in my collection. The first fire dragons were released along with their other Aspect Warrior counterparts in July 1990. White Dwarf 127 has a chunk of content about them. I've covered much of this in more depth in my Striking Scorpions and Howling Banshee videos, though I will just mention this pertinent fact again. They could be purchased for 60p each in 1990, or 5 for $2.99. What a time to be alive. Though inflation, I guess. These miniatures were replaced in 2000 by these, released with the Craft World Eldar Codex supplement for 3rd edition Warhammer 40k. While some new models were released in June of that year, along with the Codex supplement, Fire Dragons came out in the July. I will note that finding dates from Old White Dwarfs was a little tricky since there are various versions from the Anglosphere, which have different numbers depending on your country. Anyway, in the UK at least, it was July, and in White Dwarf 247, the new Fire Dragons were shown off. The pricing section shows they were available in blisters containing 2 models priced at £5. Here they are using Dire Avengers as a defensive screen, and here they are sneaking up on some Terminators. 2 Fire Dragon Exarchs were also released alongside these, and they cost £4 each. I'll also leave this price list from the back of the magazine here to tease you with for a few seconds. There were, of course, other releases in the years that followed, but those aren't the focus for me. Let's consider the rules now for Fire Dragons over a few editions. In Rogue Trader, the Fire Dragon squad cost 160 points and consisted of 5 Fire Dragons. Each Fire Dragon wore Dragon Armour, which was a 3+ save, and each came equipped with a melter gun and a las pistol. Dragon Armour does sound cool though, doesn't it? 2nd edition had them costing 28 points each, and squads were between 3 and 7 models. Again, they were equipped with melter guns and las pistols, and their saving throw was the same as in Rogue Trader. You can see their profile here as well. In this edition, infantry didn't all have the same movement characteristic like they did in 3rd edition, so fire dragons could move 5 inches. Their profile is close to that of a Space Marine, but with a weaker strength and toughness value, and a slightly higher leadership. In 3rd edition, fire dragons were an elite's choice, and their squads numbered between 5 and 10, with each model costing 17 points. This time, the weapons were called fusion guns rather than melter guns. However, in this edition, these were distinct weapons. Melter guns were range 12, strength 8, AP 1, assault 1 weapons, which rolled an extra d6 for armor penetration against vehicles if within half range or under. Fusion guns were similar, although their strength was only 6, which is a little disappointing given that fire dragons have a notoriety for finding the melting point of their opponent's vehicles, but never mind. Fire dragons were also armed with melter bombs as standard. Models armed with melter bombs in this edition could make a single attack in close combat against a vehicle. Like melter guns, they had an armor penetration of strength 8 plus 2d6. Fire dragons could also take plasma grenades for plus 2 points per model. One model could be upgraded to an Exarch for 11 points, and they could exchange their fusion gun for a fire pike for 18 points. The Exarch could also take some warrior powers, Burning Fist for 20 points and Tank Hunter for 15. By the way, a fire pike is a slightly longer range melter gun, 18 inches, and it follows the same rules for armor penetration. Finally, 110 points could buy you a Wave Serpent dedicated transport. I remember my friends shoving some of these guys into a Falcon Graf tank and dropping them near my Predator to heat up my backline a bit. And that was just one of a whole host of shenanigans he used to pull on me. What a guy. Now it's time for the sculpts from 2000. David asked me to paint his 4 miniatures. There were 3 different sculpts, one with a fairly balanced stance, one putting more weight on his back foot, and another leaning forward somewhat, and with some kind of sash tied around his right arm. These are quite different from the Rogue Trader sculpts, having smaller helmets, longer fusion guns, and these little dragon scale tabards around their waist. David asked me to paint these in a style befitting the era in which they were released, so we chose this reference image from the 3rd edition Codex as inspiration, and of course my own creative license. I'm beginning with a white prime. You can see I've already painted the fusion gun, which was a little experiment off camera. I achieved this using Vallejo flat brown, followed by Citadel Rune Lord brass. To begin the base coat, I mixed Vallejo orange red with Citadel contrast Baal red. Surprisingly, the earth didn't open up when I mixed a contrast paint with a non-contrast paint. This might seem like a bonkers thing to do, but please save your judgment until you see the end result. In short, I was aiming for a base coat on which to apply Flesh Tearers red, without it looking as blotchy as when I applied it straight onto a white prime, so I concluded that a vibrant red would be the ideal base coat. You may see that the base looks a little browner in the middle of this edit. That's just because I had some tan earth left on my palette, and I wanted to use it up. This orange-red mix goes on all of the armour, very much like I did with the other fire dragon. This is how he looks after that coat of paint. Citadel Black Legion goes on the helmet to give a smooth base coat of black, but I'll revisit the helmet later to give it a slight tint of red. This time I'm mixing Flesh Tearers red with Acrylic Flow Improver to create this questionable looking liquid, but it's really just a deep red wash, which I slop on liberally so that it flows into all of the recesses. It's at this point you will have realised you haven't stumbled across a tutorial, but the whims of a madman, firing paint around with carefree abandon until something wonderful emerges. This is a practice I wholeheartedly recommend. Then I take Flesh Tearers red again, but this time undiluted, and apply it all over the black helmet to give it a sort of red tinge. And then I wash the fusion gun with Agrax Earthshade. Again, if you see the lack of logic in this painting process, you'd be absolutely right. But usually, It's because I'm painting in a dry place, while waiting for something else on the model to dry. Caliban green is applied to the scales on the tabard, and the pipe on the weapon. This is the darkest shade of green that will be visible on these parts. I shall highlight these later. Trollslayer orange is now used to highlight all of the red areas. This is quite a broad highlight. When that's dry, I take barbarian flesh and I use it to create sharper highlights over the orange. I don't do this on every edge, I just use it to pick out areas of interest. You know what I mean. The orange stage could be skipped, but I like it because it gives the highlights a sort of gradient. I take Thunderhawk blue and thin it slightly, and then paint it on the cloth around his arm, and on the back, and the edge of the tabard. When that's dry, I highlight these same places with Fenrisian grey. I find it makes the cloth look more interesting if the highlights are a series of parallel, short, sharp strokes as I'm doing here. It also means you're not doing the same kind of painting every time you're highlighting, which is important for the process, since it breaks up potential monotony. Variety, after all, can help with motivation, if that's something you struggle with when painting. Mephiston red is painted on the edges of the panels on the helmet as part of the first highlight. The aim was to make the helmet a deep red, but I wanted the edges to be somewhat brighter. This highlight was followed by another, using Trollslayer orange and covering less area. Citadel Warpstone glow is used to pick out the bottoms of each of the scales and the ribs on the pipes, as well as details on the fire dragon symbol on the power cell. And then the process is repeated with moot green for a bit of extra poppage. Then the base is painted with Vallejo tan earth before applying a dry brush of dark sand. And there we have it. 2 methods of painting fire dragons. One orange, one red. Some with yellow helmets, some with dark red. Green bases versus tan earth bases. Which style of miniature do you prefer? And which paint scheme? Do let me know in the comments. As well as painting aspect warriors, and you can see that I have quite a few flavours of these now, I have been trying my hand at painting a scheme for the Craft World troops. I didn't want to do any of the big 5, for reasons. So I settled on a white and blue, which, as it turns out, is Craft World Necretine. Or maybe it's Necretine. Who knew? But I think a table of these with lots of jet bikes will look splendid. In my next video, I intend to focus on the Falcon Graph tank, so stay close to the channel to see how that goes. Remember, if you like what I do, you can always check out my other work on Instagram and maybe toss me a coin on Ko-fi. And with that, I better go paint some more minis. Take care, and thanks for watching. Fire of the Dragons. Fusing of the fusion gun. Fire of the Dragons. Melting of the melter gun. Don't you want to know why we keep melting armor? It's our weapons, our red hot weapons. Don't you want to know why we keep melting armor? It's our weapons, our red hot weapons. Danger, danger. Hot melter when we touch, when we kiss. Danger, danger. Hot melter when we touch, when we kiss, when we touch and when we kiss. Fire of the Dragons, Fire of the Dragons, fusing of the fusion gun. Fire of the Dragons, Fire of the Dragons, melting of the melter gun, yeah.